Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, whom we know as Lewis Carroll, was a fascinating man. He was much more interesting than most of us have ever thought, and certainly much more than just the author of the Alice books. He was a brilliant mathematician, a master photographer, and a pioneer in the art form. He was a theologian and a minister, a creator of games and riddles, and he invented a ton of stuff. Now, we'll get to talk about Alice in Wonderland and his work for children in a minute, but first I want to tell you about how creative this man was in some really practical ways. It's so interesting that he put a ton of thought and ingenuity into ways to make reading and writing easier for people. Such as, here's some examples. He invented something called a nyctograph for the writer who, maybe this has happened to you, who wakes up in the night with an idea. And back in the day, they would have had to light a candle to get up to write it all down, right? To be able to see. So he has a device that would help you to take notes in the dark. He also invented a special apparatus to help a bedridden person or someone who just wants to stay in bed and read hold a book sideways. That's a great idea. He also invented a stamp case with special sleeves for different values of stamps for people who love to write letters like himself. Do you know that he wrote and received as many as 98,721 letters? And we know this because he had a special letter register that he used to write every single one down. This stamp case includes a special booklet on how to be a good correspondent, which he called 8 or 9 wise words about letter writing. He also made an improvement to the typewriter that made it easier to justify the left margin, which was important back when we were using typewriters. So Charles attended Christ Church College at Oxford, and he graduated first in his class in mathematics. And he went on to teach mathematics there, and he wrote tons of books about higher math. But besides that, he loved to tell stories. He loved to invent and improve upon games and make up puzzles. And he did this ever since he was a child. He was the eldest of 11 children, and he kept them all entertained in all these creative ways, thinking of things to help them pass the time. He was a master communicator, even though when he was a child he had a rough time with a fever that left him deaf in one ear, and he suffered from a stammer that he called his hesitation. It was hard for him to get his words out. So these kinds of things may have kept him from interacting fluently with adults, but they certainly didn't keep him from developing his mind. While he never got married, he played the role of an uncle to his friends' children, as a lot of Victorian bachelors did. And one of his particular friends was George MacDonald, who wrote The Princess and the Goblin, among many other stories. Another friend of his who he worked with had 3 daughters, and his favorite was one of the girls whose name was Alice Liddell. And he would often take Alice and her 2 sisters on boat trips along the Thames River and entertain them with all kinds of stories. And it was on one of these excursions that the short story of Alice's adventures underground was first told. Well, Alice enjoyed the story so much she begged him to write it all down, and he did, in longhand with his own illustrations. And Alice loved it, as did her sisters and George MacDonald's children. And in 1865, the book was published as Alice's Adventures in Wonderland under the pen name Lewis Carroll. He wanted to keep his important mathematical writings separate from this children's fantasy story. Well, the book and its newly famous author, Lewis Carroll, was a huge success. And Alice's Adventures sold 5,000 copies in its first official edition, and many millions since. The book has been read in 170 languages, and Lewis Carroll, as you probably know, has become one of the most popular children's book authors in history. If he hadn't died of pneumonia at the age of 66, maybe we would have had a few more of Alice's adventures to enjoy, but aren't we glad that we have these stories and all their wonderful characters and wordplay and silliness and cleverness today? All our thanks to Charles Lutwidge Dodgson for taking us with him into Wonderland. We think that's his best invention of all.